From seemingly endless wars to historic peace agreements, from outbreaks to political turmoil, controversy in sport, and notable deaths, 2016 was a big year for the news. We'll have more on all of those stories in a few moments, but we begin this broadcast with our top news story for 2016, the seemingly unending parade of terrorist attacks across the world. It began in March on the 22nd when 3 coordinated attacks were launched in Brussels, killing 32. Just days later, 75 people were killed in Lahore, Pakistan after a suicide blast. The attacks continued when 45 people were killed in an attack on the Istanbul airport in June. In July, there was a bombing in Bangladesh as well as a truck attack in Nice, France. That attack left 85 people dead. August saw 2 separate bombings in Turkey, one targeting a wedding in Gaziantep and the second targeting a checkpoint in the country's southeast. Finally, Germany was subjected to a truck attack in December, which left 11 people dead. Many of those attacks were perpetrated by sympathizers of the Daesh terrorist organization, which rose to infamy in 2014. Beginning this year, Iraq launched a major offensive against the group in an effort to retake vast swathes of territory captured in the 2014 uprising. Operation Fatah has been going on throughout most of the year, and its main objective is to retake the city of Mosul. By October, Iraq announced that the offensive was successful and that retaking the city center was proceeding faster than expected. While the world was battling terrorism, there was a different sort of battle taking shape in the United States. The 2016 U.S. presidential campaign was one of the most bizarre and vicious ever. The campaign started, as many U.S. campaigns do, with the Republican and Democratic parties choosing their respective candidates. On the Republican side, things got bizarre when billionaire Donald Trump entered the race. He snagged the nomination after gaining popular support, making racist and inflammatory comments. On the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton went up against Bernie Sanders. Clinton would eventually win the Democratic nomination. In the final months of the campaign, Trump began to battle an increasing number of PR catastrophes, including a slew of sexual harassment allegations and his continued rhetoric construed by many to be racist and inflammatory. Despite the racist remarks, or perhaps because of them, Trump was elected 45th President of the United States on November 8th. Since being elected, Trump has been no stranger to controversy, alienating China, appointing fellow billionaires and radical right-wingers to his cabinet, and publicly denouncing both the CIA and the FBI. The Trump election has also seen thousands of Americans take to the street in protest against his election. The United Kingdom made history when voters opted to leave the European Union. The Brexit referendum was held on June 23rd and saw 52% in favor of leaving the EU. In the aftermath of the vote, there were several major upsets, including the resignation of Prime Minister David Cameron and more talk in Scotland of yet another referendum on seceding from the UK. In the months following the vote, the Leave campaign has been blasted for winning the referendum by making misleading and outright false statements. Reports of racism and xenophobia are also on the rise in the UK following Brexit. Despite all of this, the British government has vowed to go ahead with Brexit. Current Prime Minister Theresa May has said that formal proceedings to leave the EU will begin in 2017. Syria's civil war started way back in 2011, and by 2016 it had taken a disturbing turn. In December, Syrian government forces, supported by Russian and Iranian air power, breached the city of Aleppo. The breach of the rebel stronghold ended months of misery in the city after it had been subjected to a constant bombing of hospitals, and the cutoff of food supplies made conditions in the city unbearable. In the aftermath of the loss of Aleppo, the Russian ambassador to Turkey was killed at a public event by a man screaming about the Russian involvement in the Syrian war. In January, news of a strange mosquito-borne illness called ZIKA began to reach the world. The ZIKA virus outbreak began in Brazil and quickly spread to most of the Americas and even parts of Asia. While the virus is not fatal to adults, it causes a condition called microcephaly in infants when pregnant women contract the infection. Thanks to widespread prevention and mosquito spraying, the effects of a Zika pandemic were minimized, and in November, the World Health Organization declared the infection over. Brazil was in the news a lot in 2016, and not just because of the Zika outbreak. Throughout most of the first half of the year, the country was involved in a growing political crisis. After a series of protests rocked the nation, demonstrators were calling for the resignation of the president, Dilma Rousseff, after allegations of bribery were revealed. The protests eventually resulted in a formal impeachment proceeding against the president, and on August 31st, Rousseff was removed from power. Brazil also hosted the Summer Olympics from August 5th to 21st, although the sporting aspect was largely overshadowed by the ZIKA infection, Brazil's political crisis, and hygiene concerns. The world did manage to focus on one sporting-related story, though, the alleged widespread doping of Russian athletes. Back in 2015, the World Anti-Doping Agency launched an investigation into widespread doping by Russia, and by the end of the year, the allegations had been confirmed to be true. The International Olympic Committee responded by banning many Russian athletes from the 2016 Games and stripping Russia from many medals from previous Olympics. The so-called Panama Papers were released in April, and they sent shockwaves through political and financial circles around the world. The papers themselves are 11.5 million documents that were leaked to the media from law firm Mossack Fonseca. The documents primarily contained information about shell companies used to facilitate illegal operations. Many high-profile individuals have been named and shamed by the leak, and the fallout will likely continue into next year. A mass shooting is defined as an incident involving more than 3 victims, and in 2016 there were more than 350 of them across the United States. Sadly, mass shootings in America are commonplace, but this year one in particular stood out. On June 12th, 29-year-old Omar Mateen killed 49 people and injured 53 more at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida. Motivation for the attack seems to be linked to self-radicalization after Mateen pledged allegiance to the Daesh terrorist organization. Radicalization was also a theme in the murder of Joe Cox, a British MP representing the Batley and Spen constituency. Cox died after being attacked by Thomas Mair, a 52-year-old man associated with radical right-wing organizations. Witnesses to the attack describe that Mair yelled "Britain First," the name of a far-right political party in that country, as he was attacking Cox, prompting law enforcement to treat the case as an act of terrorism. In November, Mair was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. 2016 was an unstable year for many after a series of earthquakes rocked the globe. One of the worst affected regions was central Italy after 2 quakes hit that area in August. Nearly 300 people were killed in the 5.5 and 6.1 magnitude quakes, which also decimated buildings. The same region was then hit by another 6.6 magnitude quake in October, causing further devastation. 673 people were killed in Ecuador after a 7.8 magnitude quake rocked that country in April. New Zealand's South Island was hit by a powerful quake in November. That quake resulted in few deaths, but major damage to infrastructure. And finally, more than 100 people were killed after a 6.5 magnitude quake struck off the coast of Indonesia in December. 2016 saw the continuation of a disturbing trend of police-involved shootings across the United States. The most publicized took place when police officer Jeronimo Yanez shot and killed Philando Castile during a traffic stop. Castile was reportedly reaching for his wallet at the time of the incident. The police officer in that case has since been charged with second-degree manslaughter. There was yet another high-profile shooting that took place in September when Keith Scott was fatally shot by police. Officers involved in that shooting claimed that Scott possessed a gun at the time of the incident, but the allegations have yet to be proven. The seemingly endless series of police shootings across the United States sparked dozens of protests across the country. While the vast majority of the protests were peaceful in nature, there was an incident on July 7th that was anything but. Just before 9 p.m. Central Time, Xavier Johnson opened fire on Dallas, Texas police officers, killing 5 and injuring 11 other people, including civilians. Johnson, who was reportedly angry over the recent police shootings, was killed during the incident. South Korea's President Park Geun-hye has experienced months of demonstration and rock-bottom approval ratings after she was involved in an influence peddling scandal. It is alleged that the president allowed one of her close friends to peddle influence due to the pair's close relationship. President Park has been impeached by the South Korean parliament. Colombia made history when they signed an historic peace agreement with the FARC rebel group, ending a war which had been ongoing since the 1960s. The peace deal was signed into law in November. However, it has been criticized after an earlier peace deal was rejected by Colombian voters in a referendum, and this second peace deal was pushed through without a referendum. Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos has received the Nobel Peace Prize for brokering the deal. While earthquakes were a major source of news in 2016, there were other devastating natural disasters which wreaked havoc across the globe. In August, a series of wildfires ripped across Portugal, destroying 37 buildings and killing 4 people. In California, 7 people were killed when more than 560,000 acres were burned. And in Tennessee, 3 people were killed and 15,000 acres burned when fires ravaged the west of the state. It was not fire, but water and wind which devastated the Central American nation of Haiti. Hurricane Matthew made landfall on October 7th, killing hundreds and leaving thousands without shelter. North Korea was continually in the news in 2016 after that reclusive country launched a series of nuclear tests in violation of international sanctions. The first took place in January, in which the North claimed to be a test of a hydrogen bomb. The January test was followed up by an additional test in May and in September, despite protests from the international community. 2016 saw some very public successes and failures for private space exploration company SPACEX. In April, the company managed to successfully land a rocket on a barge after sending a payload into space. The news, though, not as good in September, when a failed launch from Cape Canaveral resulted in the rocket and the satellite payload bursting into flames. A large number of noteworthy people died in 2016, the most reported of which was the King of Thailand. The king had ruled Thailand since 1946 and was reportedly extremely popular among the public. He is to be succeeded by his son. The world also lost several key political figures in 2016. Shimon Peres, the only person ever to serve as both Prime Minister and President of Israel, passed away in September, and Fidel Castro, the leader of the Cuban Revolution, passed away in November. 2016 was also the year we lost David Bowie, Prince, Muhammad Ali, Leonard Cohen, and George Michael. On June 30th, Rodrigo Duterte took office as President of the Philippines. Duterte has made headlines by calling for the execution of drug addicts, comparing himself to Nazis, and working to distance the Philippines from the United States, a longtime ally. Egypt Air made headlines when flight MS-804 crashed into the Mediterranean Sea in May, killing all passengers and crew on board. The cause of the crash is still officially under investigation. However, early results indicate some kind of explosion on board the aircraft. BlackBerry, Microsoft, Apple, and Samsung were all technology companies that made headlines in 2016. Microsoft grabbed the world's attention when they purchased professional social networking website LinkedIn for some $26 billion. Apple released the iPhone 7, while BlackBerry announced they would be getting out of the smartphone business altogether. And finally, Samsung made headlines after their flagship smartphone, the Galaxy Note 7, was found to house batteries which could spontaneously ignite. We caught a glimpse of what a brave new world of cyber attacks might look like after DNS hosting company Dyn was attacked by a botnet primarily comprised of Internet of Things devices. The attack spanned a better part of a day and took down several key major websites. 2016 was a bad year for internet giant Yahoo after 2 major security breaches were revealed. Both breaches took place years ago, the first happening in 2013 when the usernames and passwords of up to 1 billion accounts was released, and the second breach occurred in 2014 and saw the information from some 500 million accounts being stolen. You would be forgiven if, in July, you thought you had been inexplicably transported back to the mid-1990s. On July 6th, Pokemon Mania hit the world after the augmented reality game Pokemon Go was released. The game allows users to capture virtual Pokemon on their smartphone by traveling to a location in the real world. The game has been downloaded more than 500 million times since it was released. The world rallied around the Leicester City Football Club in May after they won the Premier League Championship. The story was a classic underdog tale described by some newspapers as the greatest sporting upset ever. 2016 was the year that Al Jazeera English celebrated its 10th anniversary, BBC World News turned 25, and Twitter commemorated a decade of micro-messaging. And finally, it was the year that INET celebrated 10 years of YouTube production after formally rebranding ourselves in 2006. So from all of us here at INET, thanks for watching, Happy New Year, and here's looking forward to the next decade of video.